On this show, I'm going to be talking about all kinds of things that I find online. Anywhere from the bizarre, to the scientific, to the social, to the arts. Anything that I find that are just going to be interesting that I know that I can at least relate some sort of opinion on. My hopes is to share with you a different perspective that you might find interesting. I'm not going to be like a Bill O'Reilly here or one of those angry political commentators. Take a much more bipartial approach to showing you and talking about the things that are happening in the world today. So let's get started. Girl Scout sells cookies outside a pot dispensary. This could spell controversy. Yes. Okay, so a Girl Scout sets up her Girl Scout table with all the cookies outside of a pot dispensary. Her explanation as to why she's doing this is because they get hungry afterwards, as is said by the East Bay Express. Apparently, there are very, very hungry potheads there. According to the article I read today, she was sold out within 45 minutes. Her parents say that she's going to be back next weekend by popular demand. Popular demand. Those Girl Scout cookies are going to be going fast in the hands of those potheads. This girl lives in Northern California. Her pot dispensary is based in Northern California. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Northern California, that's a very green-friendly part of California. San Diego, the southern area, the entire state has legalized medical marijuana. However, the further south you get, the more restricted it becomes. So it's not really a surprise that this is the section of California that's really getting the Girl Scouts set up in front of a pot dispensary. In Colorado, on the other hand, where marijuana is legal, the Girl Scout community is kind of a little not so happy about this. Which is interesting, because Colorado has actually legalized marijuana for recreational use, whereas California has only legalized it for medical use. Medical use. That being said, coming from California and living there for many years, I have a pretty good perspective on how marijuana medical use is actually being used. It really, pretty much every pothead I know just has their green card, just so that they can go and pick up marijuana and smoke it for fun. Medical use aside, it really is being abused for recreational use. From my perspective, the reason why the Girl Scouts of California and the Girl Scouts of Colorado are coming from a different place and a different idea of how marijuana should be approached in this type of situation is really understanding the type of stresses that they're under. The Girl Scouts of Colorado live in a state where marijuana is legal for recreational use. Okay, that's saying that right there, parents are going to be a little bit more on guard. They're going to have especially conservative parents, are going to have a little bit more to worry about. Whereas in California, it's only for medical use. There's still this idea that there's a kind of a distance between the general public and marijuana. Whatever the truth may be, the pressures on these two different groups, these two different sets of parents, having to take care of their daughters and grow them in different cultures, different environments, and different perspectives on this drug, definitely renders a different idea. Moving on. Okay, so I read another article today talking about how Facebook and other various social medias that promote various forms of sharing either intellectual copyright material or actual physical material, unused objects, is costing us money and our economy to be depleted. Basically what they're saying is because our culture is shifting, especially in young people, the emerging culture is shifting towards not spending, towards the free ideals of the country, we are putting ourselves in an economic downturn. We're not putting our money back into the country because we're basically recycling or sharing, going back to a barter system, really. And that's limiting the growth of our domestic economy. I can see their point, we aren't spending money we're not going to spend money if we're going to share. However, I think the problem is much bigger than these little tiny bartering systems that are popping up. Even if it's a nationwide bartering system, you have to look at the root of it. Why is everybody obsessed with free stuff? Why is everybody obsessed with bartering in the first place? Why is it going in this direction? Facebook and other internet-based sharing providers are not the sole cause for it. They're an outlet, they're an opportunity. There's a group of people who are seeing an opportunity to bring forth a media, open a doorway, if you will, to allow these people to share back and forth, to allow these people to do what they want. They're providing them a service. But the thing is, they can't provide that service if that service isn't wanted in the first place. So why do people want it? Okay, so I got this information from a history teacher I had. He was an economic history teacher. He's one of the wisest men I've ever known, and I like to share some of that with you guys. In the early 1900s, we were spending probably about 15% of our income on necessities. Basically our housing, the gas for our cars, the food on our tables, the clothes on our back, everything that you have to spend, really necessary. It was the cost of living, just to be alive and to continue to go to work. It was about 15%. Right before the Great Depression, it went up to about 16-17%. Literally, right before the Great Depression. And that sent a whole shockwave throughout our culture. Our money had to be shifted suddenly. We had a different perspective on how we were spending things. We had 15% that had to go to our necessities, and then the rest of it could go to our economy. That's great for our economy. We're sitting here spending American money on American-made products in America. Now all of a sudden we have to reevaluate what we're spending our money on, because 15% might turn into 16%. 16% might turn into 17, 20, 30, who knows? Today, we spend 60% of our income on necessities. That is a huge difference from 100 years ago. Now this is an inflation rate. Yeah, $100 100 years ago is like $1 billion today. Now everybody knows the Back to the Future gimmick with the inflation rate. You go back in time, you invest a little bit of money, you come back to the future, and bam, you're a billionaire. But this is a little bit different. This is actually how much money we just have to spend on ourselves and how much we have to spend on our necessity. That's this hole. We have this big hole where the general population doesn't have a lot of money to play with anymore. So what do? They still need to find their widgets. They still need to find their toys for their kids, their electronics, their movies, all of these things. So they look for it in other ways. Bartering. I'll trade you this, you trade me that, and we go back and forth. We're not using American legal tender anymore because American legal tender to us isn't as valuable as it used to be. We can't turn around and reinvest our hard-earned cash into our economy because we don't have enough of it left over after paying for food, housing, and cars. So that's the kind of that's my perspective on the situation. I don't think that it's like anybody's fault. I'm not going to go right wing, left wing here on this. I do believe that we need to have a different approach to our economy, to how we view our nation's infrastructure in general. But that's a whole different topic. Today, I just wanted to talk about how there's a certain perspective out there where these social networks are somehow causing this bartering system, which is starting to cost our economy dearly. It's really a much deeper and more complex issue than that, and I think pointing the finger on something like this is just going to get us nowhere. Okay, moving from business onto science! Okay, so there's this new perspective on science that is really interesting, very intriguing. I think a lot of people out there are very fascinated by the things that are happening with quantum physics. Quantum physics in general public has a mixed rap. On one hand, people are very interested in it, they want to know more about it, they really believe that there could be these different perspectives on our physical reality that we are unaware of. However, there's also this idea that quantum physics is sort of revolving around pseudoscience, which is unfair. Quantum physicists are scientists. They do the math, they do the programs, they do not make claims in general that are unfounded in their research. That being said, there are some really cool stuff happening here. A few years ago, there were these scientists that did this really interesting project. They studied the effect of human consciousness and perspective on ice crystals. So basically the idea was this. You set two guys up in two different rooms. They both staring at a box of water starting to freeze. One of them is thinking soothing, calming, meditative thoughts that are nice and pretty. And the other guy's angry. He's staring at this thing with like death vision, and he's hating it, and he's filled with such rage. You would think, okay, well, laws of physics, there's really no difference here. Everything that's going on physically in his brain is going on up here. Maybe his heart rate is increasing, but it shouldn't have any active effect on something that has no direct contact with it. Basically, you actually have to do something to an object physically that you can see in order for something to happen. well, what could possibly be happening if the two guys are just inwardly thinking either nice or angry things? Well, it was actually pretty interesting. It surprised a lot of people. Basically, the box where the guy was sending meditative states had ice crystals starting to form inside of it as the water froze that were sort of soft and pretty and symmetrical, whereas the guy with the angry thoughts being projected towards his ice crystals, these really jagged, asymmetrical, angry little ice crystals, very angry, Jack Frost style, old Jack Frost style, not new Jack Frost style. Anyways, okay, so basically, physicists have done it again. The general public might have a harder time understanding this perspective, however, because it's a little harder to see. It's not as pretty as pretty ice crystals or as ugly ice crystals. The idea is that there's a complete connectivity between everything in the universe, and these little particles can be affected by each other even though they're on the exact opposite side of the universe. It has no difference whatsoever. Kind of the butterfly effect. A butterfly in North America flaps its wings and there's a hurricane in South America. There's no reason why that should happen, but the idea is that a chain of events were caused because of the interconnectivity of our world. This goes even deeper and says there's a certain degree of interconnectivity throughout our entire universe. And, well, they actually might be right. Basically, they've been studying these particles. Particle A is over here doing its own thing. Particle B is over here doing its own thing. Well, when they do a certain thing to particle A, they apply a certain magnetic force to it, even though they are separated through a vacuum, through distance, through 100 different ways, and should not have any effect on each other whatsoever. There's an immediate response from particle B. Why? We don't know. Maybe there is some sort of mystical interconnectivity. Or maybe there's just some sort of physical reaction that we aren't aware of. There might be another layer to our reality that we haven't been able to mathematically prove or even test yet. But that's not really realistic or scientific. So, what we're really looking at here is something's going on. Something we didn't understand before. Something new. Problems that we're having before with metaphysics are starting to get filled in. The little holes in these theories are beginning to fill in. We're starting to level in and say, hey, maybe there is something to these metaphysical theories. Maybe there is this interconnected web that ties the entire galaxy, the entire universe together. It's too early to say for sure, but it's a really interesting notion to think about. And that will bring a lot of insight to where we are in a galaxy. The problem is, I'm normally really skeptical of this stuff because I want it so badly. And I think that's a perspective that a lot of people should adopt. If you really want something to be true, really try to disprove it. Do everything you can to say, no, it's not true. Because it's so much easier to fall into the gap or fall into the trap of believing in things that you want to believe in. It's tough. In this situation, I would love to be able to think that I live in a world where mind over matter can really alter my reality. Outside of simply just ice crystals and particles and waves and these sorts of things. I'd love to live in a world where if I really believed in something hard enough, I really wanted something hard enough, and I concentrated, then I could change the probability of the universe and allow it to happen. But that being said, there isn't enough math to prove anything like that. What we do have is that there are these metaphysical theories and ideas that have a lot of holes in them, and we're starting to see that those holes are being filled in. Maybe there's something else going on. Just because we have one theory doesn't mean it is the theory right now. I am excited though because it is bringing the probability of that theory up a little. And that makes me happy, because that is something that I'd like to see in the world. I would really like to believe these things. But in the meantime, let's keep our heads in the game and continue doing the math, continue figuring out what other possibilities there are, what other mathematical probabilities there might be to explain some of these phenomena. We really have to have a whole picture in order to understand how the universe works. So there you have it for the science for today. My next story is drawn from World News. It's coming from aljazeera.com. So, suspected guards from the Nazi death camp Auschwitz, and I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly. I apologize. I do apologize. They have been arrested for war crimes. This comes towards the end of the Nazi hunt that's occurred after World War II, trying to track down these war criminals. This is kind of a big deal now because a few years ago there was a guard, a kind of a low-level ranking individual at one of these camps who was prosecuted for war crimes despite the fact that he really didn't have a whole lot of power at that time. Basically, the prosecution said that it was criminal not to stand up and fight against this at the time. Even if you weren't that powerful, even if you weren't that high in the rankings of the Nazi regime, you're still responsible for your own personal actions and for not going out there and trying to stop this. And you can imagine why this is going to be the sort of last push to find the remaining Nazis, because they're all dying from old age. The individuals that are captured were in their 80s and their 90s. They really didn't have that much longer to live, and now they're being arrested and put in jail. A lot of people are saying that that's right, some people maybe not so much. The prosecutors involved in this are saying that there is no reason that age should restrict justice. Now, I can see that perspective. However, I'm not really one to be arguing on the side of justice in our legal system. I believe our legal system is really set up around a principle of punishment, of revenge. Not really to put what was wronged right. Putting an 85-year-old man, putting a 95-year-old man into jail isn't really going to be doing anything for anybody. It's just going to be putting these old people in prison for the last remaining years of their life. Granted, maybe they did do horrible things. Maybe they were neglectful and they should have stood up while their superiors did horrible things. But why are we doing this? What is actually the point? Is it just to send a message to future generations? Don't do this, or even when you're 90, we're throwing you away, locking you up. I don't know. It doesn't really seem to be the best way to approach this type of situation. Okay, so here's the thing. I have a problem with how our culture views crime and punishment. You see, today in our global culture, we sort of view punishment as what happens when you do something wrong, when you hurt somebody else. You are punished by them. For me, I feel like there should be some sort of reason why we send people to jail other than simply to punish them. An eye for an eye really doesn't work for me. I think that we're honestly damaging ourselves as an entire race, an entire society, when we go around hurting each other just because somebody hurt us or because it's the right thing to do. I live in the Bible Belt. I live in Texas. We literally have a fast track to the death penalty. I am absolutely against capital punishment. I think that it is wrong to kill people, period. I don't think that killing somebody justifies the murder of that individual. I'll be doing a blog on this later when I do commentaries on issues that I find needing to be talked about. But right now, focusing on this, sending 85 to 95-year-olds to jail because of something that they did 100 years ago, I don't really see a lot of reason in that. I don't really find that it to be justice. I don't feel like that anybody's going to be getting anything good out of this. If anything, I think it's just trying to hurt somebody that did something bad a long time ago. And for me, that just isn't a smart thing to do. It's not the right thing to do. In semi-related news, kinda, sorta, not really, a seemingly massive act of anti-Semitic destruction has just happened recently. I know it's kind of a tongue twister, but basically in Japan, hundreds of diaries of Anne Frank have been destroyed. Throughout the country, libraries have cited random and inexplicable destruction of property, all being Anne Frank's diary. For those of you who don't know, the Anne Frank diary is a memoir of a girl who most likely died during the Holocaust. She wrote down the events of things that were happening to her and her family while the Holocaust was going. It's a very powerful story. It made a lot of head turns, and it's something that should never be disrespected in this manner. It's unfortunate that it's happened, but it's also really weird. Japan doesn't have a very large Jewish population, and it practically has no history of anti-Semitic acts. Basically, it's hard to have anti-Semitic acts when you don't really have that many Jewish people living in your country. You can't hate people if you don't even know they exist. But still, all of these copies of Anne Frank suddenly were just destroyed, went missing, stolen, cut, and burned. No one knows why. No anti-Semitic group has stepped forward to take responsibility for this action, and it's really strange. Like, why in Japan? Why did this happen across the country? All of these copies of this book have been destroyed at about the exact same time. It had to have been some kind of organization. Authorities are looking to track down whoever did this. I mean, if it was just a group of kids that went to a couple of libraries in their town to destroy them, that would be one thing. But this is nationwide. Of course, the Jewish community here in America and across the globe are taking this very seriously. They're urging Japanese authorities to go in there and really take a look at this, because anti-Semitism is just evil. Coming from the last story I told you and into this one, it really shows you there's still a lot of hatred in the world, there's still a lot of negativity, there's a lot of black hearts out there, and we have to protect ourselves, we have to be aware of it, and that's the only way that we can hope to see a brighter future. Okay, now I'd like to end today on a kind of a positive note. Researchers have found that being successful is a matter of willpower and real grit. I know this might not sound like too much of a shocker, but it doesn't necessarily mean your IQ equals success. And this study has found that people with higher IQs sometimes lack the willpower and grit to continue on and laboriously go through their work in order to be successful. If you're a little bit smarter and you have a higher IQ, then when you're younger, things come a little bit easier to you. You don't have to work as hard if you're as smart as the kid next to you who maybe doesn't have the same IQ scores as you do. Well, unfortunately, the higher IQ score might not be developing certain habits and personality traits that help them succeed longer in life, whereas the kid who has to work harder and has to think more is really developing more of a grit, the long-lasting endurance to work hard and to try to achieve the goals that you're looking for. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean just because you're a little bit of a slacker and maybe your IQ's a little higher, you can't be successful in life. It just means maybe you now have to focus harder on focusing harder, or working harder at working harder in general. The article I read today actually went further and started talking about different ways of doing this. Basically, it's just a matter of really trying to ingrain it into your personality, into your body. You also have to try and focus on self-care and self-worth. Now, these are two different things. Self-care is really feeling that you need to take care of yourself, putting energy into yourself, doing things for yourself that is good for you. And you also have to focus on self-worth. Now, this gets confused with self-esteem sometimes. Self-worth is the feelings you have about yourself. The way that you see yourself, the value you put in yourself. Self-esteem is how you think other people see you, if that makes sense. Basically, you sit around and say, everybody hates me, I'm so funny looking. That's self-esteem. Now, if you go in there and say, I really don't like myself because I'm not living up to me, that's self-worth. In both cases, that's the type of self-esteem and self-worth you want to avoid. The self-worth that you really want, the self-worth that you really want to be focusing on, is acknowledging the fact that you've made mistakes, being okay with that. Look at your mistakes as opportunities to grow. That's how you develop grit. That's how you develop the willpower and drive to continue on. Love yourself. Understand that, hey, I'm a human being too. I make mistakes. Everybody does. Now let's get back in there and do what we gotta do. It's okay to be me. It's okay to fail. In fact, they said it's better to fail. The study goes on to take on different philosophies from different CEOs from different companies. The ones that actually promote failure within themselves so that they can learn better, who enjoy actually struggling and failing and having to do better in the next time, are the ones that are actually really successful. So just keep that in mind the next time you're doubting yourself, the next time you're looking at yourself being like, you know, I did such a bad job on this, I really hate it when I do that, or God, this is so frustrating, why am I like this? Just say, hey, you know what? I need to take a breath here. I need to look at my mistakes, and I need to recognize that I'm growing as a person because of them. I know I'm getting a little preachy right now, I know I'm getting a little like, but the fact of the matter is, we're not doing this. The country is not doing this. Individuals aren't doing this. I go out every day and people are too hard on themselves. People hate themselves. People are so angry with themselves. People who need to know that they are worthy within themselves, because they are worthy. You guys are worthy. Know it. You know it. Out there in internet land.